You bring your car in for a water pump. The mechanic checks the guide, tells you it's a 3-hour job, and quotes you accordingly. He's good at what he does. He finishes in 2 hours and 20 minutes. You expect a discount for the time saved. You don't get one. You still pay for 3. That's not a mistake on the invoice. It's not an anomaly. It's the entire system working exactly as designed. And once you understand why, you'll never read a repair bill the same way again. Because here's the part almost nobody thinks to ask. If you're not paying for the time it actually took, what exactly are you paying for? There's an even stranger number buried further down that same invoice, the price of the part itself, quietly marked up far beyond what the shop paid for it. We'll get to that, but first, the labor line, because that's where the real story starts. Most repair shops don't bill you by the clock. They bill you by the book, a labor time guide published by companies like Mitchell or ALLDATA that assigns a standardized number of hours to nearly every job on nearly every vehicle. Replace a starter on a specific make and model, and the guide might say 2 hours, regardless of who's holding the wrench or how the job actually goes that day. That number, multiplied by the shop's hourly rate, somewhere between $120 and $160 nationally in 2026, depending on the state, becomes your labor charge. It sounds like it should be simple. It isn't once you notice what the system is actually doing. It has replaced your mechanic's real time with a number nobody in the room can argue with. That number didn't appear accidentally. Rewind to the years after the Depression when small repair shops were fighting for survival and mechanics were sitting on workbenches half the week with no guaranteed pay. Shops started splitting labor charges with technicians instead of paying a flat wage. After World War II, as car ownership boomed, that arrangement hardened into the flat rate system you're still billed under today. Built less to measure your car's problem than to standardize risk between a shop that needs predictable revenue and a workforce that needs predictable pay. Which explains something that seems backwards at first. The mechanic who fixed your water pump in 2 hours and 20 minutes isn't shorted by that arrangement. He's rewarded by it. Book time is also how he's paid. If the guide says 3 hours and he finishes in 2, he's still credited for 3. He effectively earned a higher hourly rate for being fast. If an apprentice takes 4 hours on the same job, he's still only paid for 3 and eats the difference. The clock on your invoice was never counting your car. It was counting a standardized fictional car that the shop and the technician had already agreed to be paid against. That single design choice quietly shapes who becomes a top earner in the trade. Technicians who consistently beat the book, finishing jobs faster than the guide predicts, end up earning far more per real hour than technicians who work carefully at the book's own pace. It rewards speed on paper, which usually means genuine skill, but it also means the highest paid person on the floor has every incentive to prefer the jobs with generous book times over the jobs that are merely important, and very little incentive to slow down and double-check something the guide already assumes is finished. The system isn't corrupt, it's just optimizing for a number that only sometimes overlaps with the thing you actually care about. Now the part further down the page. Buy a part for $100 and it's common for a shop to sell it to you for $150 to $200, a 50 to 100% markup, sometimes higher. Cheap consumables like oil filters or wiper blades can carry markups well over 200%. A $4,000 engine never gets marked up the same way because nobody's paying $8,000 for it. The markup isn't random, it's a matrix, tiered by how likely you are to notice or push back. It's tempting to read that as pure greed. It isn't, or at least not only that. The average independent repair shop runs on a net profit margin of roughly 6%, thinner than most people assume for an industry that feels expensive from the customer's side. Parts markup isn't padding a fortune. It's what keeps the lights on between the jobs where nothing goes wrong and the ones where a technician has to redo a repair for free because the first attempt didn't hold. It's what pays for the diagnostic equipment a shop needs just to read a modern engine, whether or not that equipment gets used this week. You can also see why the markup isn't a single flat number once you notice what a flat number would do. Double the price of a $4 oil filter and nobody blinks at $8. Double the price of a $4,000 engine and you're asking someone to pay $8,000, which no one will do. So shops run a tiered matrix instead, a steep markup on the cheap, forgettable parts and a much thinner one on the expensive, memorable parts a customer is actually likely to compare against a competitor's quote. It isn't designed to fool you, it's designed around the parts you're statistically unlikely to ever check. There's a related habit worth noticing too. Many shops will waive or credit the diagnostic fee if you go ahead with the repair there. That looks generous. It's really a pricing decision. A standalone diagnosis is a product a competitor could undercut once you know what's actually wrong. So shops treat the diagnosis less like a service and more like the cost of getting the much larger repair job in the door, recoverable only if you don't shop the answer around. Which raises a question worth sitting with. Have you ever gotten a repair quote that made you suspicious enough to walk away or paid it anyway just to make the problem go away? Here's where the investigation actually turns. Not every job fits in the book. Diagnosis doesn't. There's no standardized time for figuring out why your check engine light won't stop coming on, because every troubleshooting process is genuinely different. So diagnostic time gets billed separately, often at the shop's full hourly rate, uncapped by any guide. It's the rawest, least standardized hour you'll ever buy from a mechanic, the one place on the invoice where you're paying for pure expertise instead of a formula.
And that's the moment the real product finally comes into view. You can't verify most of what happens once your car disappears into the bay. You don't know if the part that failed actually needed replacing or if the problem was even where they said it was. The mechanic knows. You don't. Economists have a name for that gap. Information asymmetry, the same idea a Nobel Prize-winning paper used to explain why used car markets can collapse entirely. When a buyer can't tell a good car from a bad one, they'll only pay an average price, which pushes honest sellers with good cars out of the market and leaves it flooded with lemons. Repair shops live inside a smaller version of that same trap. If you can't tell an honest diagnosis from a manufactured one, you'll trust none of them a little, instead of trusting one of them fully, and every shop, honest or not, pays for that suspicion in the same coin. Which is why certifications exist, why warranties exist, why review platforms and 20-year-old shops with a wall of thank you cards exist. None of that is decoration, it's expensive, deliberate signaling, a shop spending real money to prove it isn't a lemon in a market where you have no other way to check. The wrench fixed the car, the invoice fixed something else, your doubt. Once you see it that way, everyone on the invoice looks different. You thought you were buying parts and labor. You were also buying the shop's ability to survive its slow weeks and its comebacks. The technician thought he was selling skill. He was also selling it against a fictional clock that could pay him more than his actual time was worth, or less, depending on how the guide read that day. The shop owner thought the business was repair. It's closer to a trust business wearing a repair business's clothes. The wrench is the delivery mechanism, not the product. There's a bigger version of this same asymmetry playing out one level up, and it's reshaping the entire industry right now. Modern cars run on manufacturer software, and the data your car generates, the diagnostics, the telematics, the exact information a mechanic needs to fix it properly, increasingly lives behind the automaker's own systems, not the shop's. Independent shops report sending several vehicles a month to a dealership simply because they can't get the data to do the job themselves. That's the same lemons problem played between shops and manufacturers instead of shops and customers. Whoever holds the information sets the price, and everyone downstream pays for not having it. The right to repair fights playing out across state legislatures right now are essentially an attempt to force that data back into the open, the same way certifications forced trust back into the open a generation ago. Electric and driver assist vehicles are widening that divide. Calibration tools, software subscriptions, and specialized training now cost real capital, and electrification and ADAS-related work is projected to keep growing sharply through the mid-2030s. Shops that can afford to invest are pulling ahead, some running net margins 2 or 3 times the industry average, while shops that can't are being bought up by larger regional chains. The gap isn't really about wrenches anymore, it's about who controls the information a wrench needs in order to be trusted. So, think back to the water pump. The 20 minutes of saved time you never got credited for wasn't a ripoff. It was the shop buying predictability, the technician buying a wage floor, and you, without realizing it, buying a number stable enough that nobody in the room had a reason to argue about it. The job was never really replacing the part. It was replacing your uncertainty about whether you could trust the person replacing it. Next time you're standing at the counter reading an invoice, you're not really pricing a repair. You're pricing how much doubt the shop had to remove to get you to sign it. That's also why the oldest advice about finding a mechanic, ask a neighbor, stick with one shop for years, look for the wall of thank you cards, was never really about finding someone who's good with a wrench. Skill is common, verifiable skill is rare, and rare things get priced accordingly. The shops that survive decades aren't necessarily the ones with the best technicians. They're the ones that found a way to make their honesty visible to someone who has no way to check it directly. So, the next time that light comes on and you're standing over an open hood, you're not just choosing where to get a car fixed, you're choosing who to trust with a story you can't verify. And now you know that's what you were always doing.